Jessica Marie Thornton stood in front of her bedroom mirror, turning her face from side to side as she examined the fine lines around her eyes. It had become a habit, one she performed quietly, always in private and always late at night, when the apartment was silent enough to let her hear the whispers of doubt in her own mind. She wasn't superficial, at least that's what she told herself. But after the divorce from Marcus, a 7-year marriage that had ended with a lawyer's phone call and a new fiancé announced on Instagram, within 2 weeks she couldn't stop noticing the things he used to criticize. The wrinkles, the sagging under her chin, the way she always turned away from front-facing cameras. Jessica was 38, divorced, and feeling erased in a city full of younger, brighter, more confident people. She worked as an administrative assistant at a busy law firm in Chicago, where she spent her days answering phones and pretending not to notice that no one ever looked at her twice anymore. That night, she made her decision. She had been browsing forums and medical tourism blogs for months, reading testimonials from other women who had flown abroad for cosmetic procedures. Malaysia kept coming up. The prices were reasonable. The clinics looked modern and professional. The reviews, at least the ones posted online, were enthusiastic. She opened a new tab and typed in the name she had bookmarked weeks ago, Horizon Medical Wellness Center, Kuala Lumpur. The website looked legitimate, silver and blue branding, testimonials from Canadian and British clients, phrases like luxury recovery accommodations and confidential and compassionate care scrolled across the screen. There was even a direct email contact with a photo of a woman in medical scrubs smiling warmly. Jessica hesitated. Then she clicked. The contact form opened. She typed, "Hi, I'm interested in a consultation. I'm planning to travel from Illinois. Is it safe to come alone?" The reply came within minutes. "Hello, dear Jessica. Yes, of course. We have many solo clients. We handle everything. You are in excellent hands." Jessica exhaled slowly, a nervous smile crossing her face. Maybe this was it. Maybe she was finally doing something for herself. She didn't know it yet, but she had just contacted the woman who would become the last confirmed person to communicate with her before she vanished. The days that followed were filled with an excitement Jessica hadn't felt in years. For the first time since her divorce, she had something to anticipate, something that felt bold, maybe even reckless, but in an empowering way. She scheduled her vacation time quietly, not telling her colleagues the real reason she'd be gone. To them, it would just be a solo trip to decompress. That was partially true. She just didn't mention the scalpels and stitches. Her family was another matter. Sarah, her younger sister, was suspicious from the start. Malaysia? Alone? Jessica, are you serious? Yes, I've done my research. It's a medical trip, but the clinic looks professional. What kind of medical trip? Just cosmetic, nothing extreme. Sarah didn't push further. She just sighed the way younger sisters do when they know their sibling won't be persuaded. Their mother, Patricia, wasn't told at all. At 69 and managing diabetes complications, Patricia didn't need the stress. Jessica booked her flight for early June, round trip from Chicago to Kuala Lumpur with a layover in Hong Kong. She received confirmation from the clinic within the hour. Dear Miss Thornton, we look forward to welcoming you to Horizon Medical Wellness Center. Your consultation and procedure are scheduled for the morning of June 8th. We will provide airport pickup, private accommodations, and post-procedure care at our in-house facility. Please bring all necessary identification and medical forms. Warm regards, Maya, Patient Care Coordinator. It sounded perfect. Too perfect. She packed lightly, sundresses, sandals, a passport holder, a mystery novel she probably wouldn't read. At the last minute, she added a small blue journal to her carry-on, one she used to write in during high school, now revived to document this strange new chapter. Her final weekend in Chicago was quiet. She had brunch with Sarah, their usual spot, and assured her sister she'd text as soon as she landed. Sarah wasn't convinced. "Just message me. I want to know you're okay the second you arrive." No delays, Jessica promised. But that text would never arrive. Jessica stepped off the plane at Kuala Lumpur International Airport into a wave of hot, humid air that enveloped her the moment she left the jet bridge. It was just past 9 p.m. on June 7th, 2017. She had been traveling for nearly 22 hours, and although her body ached and her eyes burned with exhaustion, there was a quiet sense of accomplishment inside her. She had made it. She was here. The airport was bustling. Groups of backpackers clustered near money exchange counters. Businessmen in suits rushed past coffee shops. Tired families waited in line for taxis. It was her first time leaving North America. She followed the signs to immigration, clutching her passport with both hands, occasionally glancing at her phone. There were no new messages. Sarah hadn't texted again, which she found mildly surprising, but maybe that was good. Maybe her sister was finally trusting her judgment. She passed through customs with no issues. Her passport was stamped, 30-day tourist visa approved. Everything felt smooth, almost too easy. In the arrival hall, she scanned the crowd of drivers holding up white paper signs. She spotted it almost immediately. Miss Jessica Thornton, Horizon Clinic. The man holding the sign was average height and thin, wearing a black polo shirt with no clinic logo, just the word staff embroidered in white. He didn't smile when she approached. "Jessica Thornton?" he asked in a low voice. "Yes, hi, I'm here for the clinic." "Follow me." He turned without another word and walked toward the parking structure. Something about his demeanor unsettled her. He didn't offer to take her suitcase, didn't ask how her flight was, but she chalked it up to cultural differences, or perhaps just fatigue on his part. It was late, after all. They reached a dark blue van with tinted windows. The man unlocked the sliding door and motioned for her to enter. The interior was clean and cool. Bottled water sat in the cup holder. Soft instrumental music played over the speakers. She texted Sarah as the van pulled out of the airport. "Just landed. Heading to the clinic now. Everything seems fine. We'll call in the morning." The message went through. It would be the last communication she ever sent. The van took the highway into the city. Kuala Lumpur at night was a blur of neon lights, scooters, and cars weaving between lanes. Billboards advertised cosmetic procedures, luxury apartments, and international fast food chains. They exited onto a quieter street, then another, until they reached a narrow lane lit only by dim yellow bulbs. The driver didn't say a word. He stopped in front of a sleek 4-story building with frosted glass doors and marble steps. A silver plaque read, "Horizon Medical Wellness Center. Transform with confidence." Inside, a woman in scrubs was waiting at reception. She looked exactly like her email photo. "Welcome, Jessica," she said with a warm smile. "You must be exhausted. I'm Maya. We're so glad you're here." Jessica exhaled and smiled back. If only she had known what was behind that smile. The reception area inside Horizon was bathed in cool white light, with polished tile floors and minimalist decor, tastefully modern but eerily quiet. No other patients, no other staff. Just Jessica, Maya, and the faint scent of lavender diffused into the air. "Let me show you to your room," Maya said with practiced cheer. They took an elevator to the 3rd floor. The hallway was spotless, painted in cream tones, and lined with identical wooden doors, each unmarked. Maya opened one near the end. Inside was a small private suite. A single bed, a sliding glass door that opened to a narrow balcony, a mini fridge stocked with water, and a wall-mounted TV. There was no clock, no phone. "You'll rest here tonight. The doctor will see you in the morning. Surgery is scheduled for 10 a.m., Maya explained, placing a printed itinerary on the side table. "Will I meet him before then?" Jessica asked. "Yes, Dr. Rahman likes to speak with every patient beforehand. Nothing happens without your approval." "Okay, sounds good." Maya handed her a set of pale green sleepwear, then turned to leave. "Get some rest. Tomorrow your transformation begins." The door closed with a soft click. Jessica locked it. She sat on the bed and opened the itinerary. 7 a.m. Light breakfast. 8 Town a.m. Consultation with Dr. Rahman. 9:30 a.m. Pre-op preparation. 10 Gawam here. a.m. Procedure begins. No paperwork to sign, no consent forms. That struck her as odd, but maybe it was just handled digitally. Still, she took out her journal and scribbled, "No forms yet. Seems unusual. Everything's been verbal. We'll see what tomorrow brings." She tried the TV. It worked, but all channels were in Malay. The Wi-Fi was inconsistent. Her phone struggled to load her email, and a video call attempt to Sarah failed twice before she gave up. Eventually, exhaustion took over. She curled under the light blanket, listening to the low hum of the air conditioner. Outside in the hallway, a pair of footsteps passed once, slow, heavy, and then silence. The next morning at 7:10, Maya returned with a tray of fruit, toast, and tea. "Doctor will see you shortly," she said. Jessica ate slowly. Her stomach felt tight. She wasn't nervous about the surgery, at least not in the way she thought she'd be. It was something else, a vague feeling she couldn't name. At 8:01 a.m., she was escorted into a separate room just down the hall. Inside was a desk, a leather chair, and a man in a white coat reviewing something on a tablet. He stood when she entered. "Miss Thornton, I am Dr. Kamal Rahman. Welcome to Horizon." He was in his mid-50s, tall, with an expression that was polite but unreadable. His English was fluent but with a clipped accent. "I understand you are here for a facelift and neck contouring." "Yes, I just want to look refreshed, nothing extreme." "Of course, that is our specialty. I've reviewed your photos. You are an excellent candidate." He opened a digital portfolio with before and after images of other patients, none of whom she recognized, of course, but the results were convincing. "You'll sleep through everything. The entire procedure will take less than 3 hours. You'll wake up in your room." She nodded. It was all happening so quickly. "Any questions? Will I be signing anything?" Yes, of course. The nurse will bring the paperwork to your room shortly." She thanked him and returned to her suite. The papers never came. At 9:45, Maya arrived again, this time with a small pill and a cup of water. "Just to help you relax before we prep you," she said. Jessica hesitated. "Can I read the consent forms first?" "They'll be ready downstairs. It's standard procedure." She took the pill. Within 15 minutes, the edges of the room began to blur. 2 orderlies arrived with a wheelchair. "Just a precaution," Maya whispered. "You'll be walking again in no time." They rolled her out of the room, down the hall, into the elevator, but instead of going down 1 floor, they went 3, to the basement. The fluorescent lights in the elevator flickered once, as it sank past the 1st floor. Jessica, slouched in the wheelchair, blinked slowly, her vision blurred, her arms heavy, her mind floating somewhere between awareness and unconsciousness. The sedative wasn't just to help her relax. She tried to speak, to ask why they weren't going to the surgical floor, but her mouth felt distant, like it no longer belonged to her. The elevator stopped. 3. Access restricted. That's what the sign on the door read. She caught a brief glimpse as the doors slid open with a hiss. The air changed. It was colder, damp. The polished floors and soft lighting from the upper levels were gone, replaced by concrete walls, exposed pipes, and the sterile, metallic scent of antiseptic and bleach. She was wheeled down a narrow corridor lit by flickering bulbs. Doors lined the walls, some slightly ajar, none marked. Behind one of them, Jessica could swear she heard a muffled voice, a groan maybe, then silence. "Where am I?" she managed to whisper. No one answered. The 2 orderlies, both expressionless and silent, pushed her into a wide chamber that looked nothing like a surgery room. No machines, no anesthesia monitors, no overhead lamps, just a single stainless steel table in the center under a low-hanging light, and restraints. One of the orderlies reached for her arm. She tried to move. Nothing. Her body didn't respond, only her eyes, darting wide, panicked. Something is wrong. This isn't part of the surgery. This isn't a clinic. She tried to scream, but the sound caught in her throat. From the far corner, a figure stepped into the light. Not Dr. Rahman. Another man, stockier, with a shaved head and surgical gloves already on. He said something in Malay to the others. They nodded. Jessica's wrist was strapped to the table. She was still awake, still aware. As the second strap locked around her ankle, she knew. She wasn't going to wake up in her room upstairs. She wasn't going to wake up at all. Meanwhile, above ground, at a Starbucks in Chicago, Sarah Thornton sat alone, staring at her phone. No message, no email, no call. She said she would text when she got there, Sarah thought. She always texts. She waited 2 more hours. Then she dialed the number Jessica had used from her email correspondence. It rang once, then disconnected. She tried again. This time it didn't even ring, just silence. Sarah Thornton had never been the panicky type. As a high school guidance counselor, she was trained to manage crises with patience and calm. But by 6 p.m. Central Time on June 7th, 2017, something deep in her chest was unraveling. Jessica was supposed to message her the moment she arrived at the clinic in Kuala Lumpur. She had always kept her word, especially with Sarah. "Don't worry," Jessica had said the night before leaving. "I'll check in constantly, I promise." But the promise had already been broken. Her last message, "Heading to the clinic now, everything seems fine," had come through 11 hours earlier. Nothing since. Sarah called again, straight to voicemail. She tried email. Nothing. She messaged the clinic through the email address Jessica had been using. The message showed as delivered, but was never opened. Then she emailed Jessica directly. "Hey, just checking in. Did everything go okay? Call me when you can. Love you." Nothing. She stared at her inbox for nearly an hour, refreshing every few minutes. When that didn't help, she turned to Google. Horizon. Medical Wellness Center, Kuala Lumpur. The website was still live. It looked polished, modern. Pictures of serene rooms, doctors in white coats, recovery suites that looked like spa retreats. She scrolled to the bottom. No physical address listed. Just a vague Bukit Bintang area, Kuala Lumpur. No phone numbers, no registration details, no verified reviews, just curated quotes and stock images that suddenly felt more suspicious than professional. Her stomach turned. How could Jessica not see this was a scam? Still, she told herself not to panic. Maybe her phone had died. Maybe the Wi-Fi at the clinic was spotty. Maybe she was resting after the procedure. But when Patricia, their mother, called that evening just to ask how Jessica was doing, over there, Sarah lied. "Oh yeah, she's good. She texted this morning, said she was tired, but everything went well." And then she immediately hung up and called the U.S. Embassy in Malaysia. The woman who answered was calm and professional. "Has it been more than 24 hours since your sister last made contact?" "No, not yet, but this isn't normal." "I understand. Unfortunately, we cannot classify someone as missing unless there's been at least 24 hours of complete silence and no verified contact. I would recommend waiting a bit longer. Perhaps she's just recovering." Sarah knew that tone. It was the same one she used when students' parents asked if their child was going to be okay, and she didn't have the heart to say no. By the time midnight hit in Chicago, it had been almost 16 hours since Jessica's last message. Sarah was already creating a document titled Timeline, Jessica's Trip to Malaysia. She started to gather everything: the clinic's name, screenshots of Jessica's messages, a copy of her flight itinerary, the email address, the time of her last known contact, the fact that she never responded to follow-ups. Each line on the page made her chest tighten. Something was wrong. And in a basement beneath Kuala Lumpur, Jessica Thornton was no longer Jessica Thornton. By the time morning broke in Chicago, the gap in communication had reached nearly 25 hours. Sarah didn't sleep. She spent the entire night scanning forums, tourist blogs, Reddit threads, anything with even a mention of Horizon Medical Wellness Center. She searched Google, Bing, TripAdvisor, Yelp, nothing. No business registration, no verified patient reviews, no Street View listing, just that same elegant website with shimmering promises and stock photography that now felt grotesque. She tried to call again, still no answer. Her next call was to the U.S. Embassy in Malaysia, this time with urgency in her voice. "This is not just a communication issue," she said. "My sister is missing. She checked into a clinic yesterday. I have the name. I have the last message she sent me. She's never gone silent like this." The voice on the other end shifted tone. "All right, Miss Thornton, please provide the clinic's name again." "Horizon Medical Wellness Center." "One moment while I search for that." Sarah waited, her fingers drumming restlessly on the kitchen counter. "I'm not seeing any licensed facility under that name in the Bukit Bintang district. Are you certain this is where she was headed?" "She sent me a screenshot of the confirmation email. It exists." "Can you forward us that email? We'll pass it to our local liaison at the Royal Malaysian Police." "Yes, right now." Sarah hit send. Then she stared at her laptop screen, watching the cursor blink on the timeline document she'd been building. Last message received. June 7th, 9:47 p.m., Malaysia time. No response since. Clinic has no verifiable business record. She made a new bullet. Status, missing person, unconfirmed. Meanwhile, in Kuala Lumpur, Inspector Aslan Ismail sat in a small air-conditioned office at the Dang Wangi police station when the email from the embassy landed in his inbox. He had worked dozens of missing tourist cases before, most resolved within a day or two. A lost phone, a drunken night, a missed flight. But this one felt different. He opened the attached image, a screenshot of a confirmation email. Horizon Medical Wellness Center. A woman's photo beside it, smiling, hopeful. Timestamp June 6th, 2017. He zoomed in on the email header. No physical address, no phone number, just an email domain registered through a proxy server in Singapore. He opened his database. No such facility was registered under that name. Not in Kuala Lumpur, not in Malaysia. He called the Ministry of Health. No record. He tried the National Medical Practitioners Registry. No Dr. Kamal Rahman listed. Nothing. It was as if the clinic had never existed, except for the one confirmation email sent to the victim hours before she disappeared. Inspector Aslan submitted the email address to Interpol's Cybercrime Division and requested a trace on the domain registration. His phone buzzed with a new message from the embassy. "The clinic in your correspondence does not appear in any government records. Our staff is coordinating with Malaysian authorities for further investigation. We recommend the family file an official missing persons report with their local police. We will treat this as a possible international case." Back in Chicago, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was official now. Jessica wasn't just offline. She was gone. Sarah sat across from a detective at the Chicago Police Department, her fingers gripping the edge of a thick manila folder. Inside were all the documents she'd gathered over the last 48 hours. Flight details, printouts of emails, screenshots of messages, a photo of the clinic's website and Jessica's. Itinerary, typed out line by line like a dossier prepared for war. The officer, Detective Ramon Cruz, was experienced, but even he could see Sarah wasn't overreacting. "We get a lot of cases where people just drop off the grid temporarily," he began gently. "But I can tell you're not just guessing. You've done your homework." Sarah nodded. "My sister's not impulsive. She's not the type to just disappear. She wouldn't do this to me, and this clinic she went to, it doesn't exist." That got Cruz's attention. Sarah slid the screenshot across the desk, then the printed map, then a screenshot of the Yabo I Ho Oi is data she had pulled from the website's domain registration, which was vague, masked, and routed through a proxy in Singapore. The site's hosted outside Malaysia. No local number, no license record. And look, these patient photos are stock images. I found 3 of them in a Google reverse search. Cruz raised an eyebrow. Okay, that's not nothing. He opened a case file, assigning Jessica's name and number. Thornton 2245 Coast M. We'll file this as an international missing persons case and alert Interpol through the proper channels. But full disclosure, this might take time. We have to go through the State Department, who liaises with the embassy, who liaises with Malaysian police. It's not direct. Time is the one thing we don't have, Sarah said coldly. I understand. I'll do everything I can. Meanwhile, in Kuala Lumpur, Inspector Aslan Ismail was standing in front of the building from the screenshot. It was real, 4 stories tall, frosted glass doors, silver plaque, but it was already gone. The plaque had been removed. The lights were off, curtains drawn, no visible activity inside. When he knocked, no one answered. The neighbors claimed they hadn't seen anyone enter or exit in days. One woman, an elderly vendor across the street, remembered foreign women coming and going every few weeks, but no names, no incidents. Aslan called for a locksmith. When they entered the building, it was empty. Furniture gone, clinic equipment removed. The walls still bore the marks where frames had been hung, but everything that gave the place a name or a face wiped clean. Only one thing remained. In the trash bin near the back stairwell, Aslan found a crumpled intake form, torn, stained, and partially burned. It was in English, and it bore the name Jessica Marie Thornton. Inspector Aslan crouched beside the dented aluminum trash bin in the back stairwell, the harsh fluorescent light above casting uneven shadows across the narrow concrete hall. He carefully lifted the charred fragment of paper with gloved hands and slipped it into a clear evidence pouch. The form was badly damaged, singed around the edges, smudged with something dark, but the name was unmistakable. Jessica Marie Thornton, printed in blue ink, block letters, next to it a shaky signature, and a box ticked for facial procedure. There was no date, no official stamp, no doctor's name, just Jessica's. He stood slowly, glancing back toward the main clinic floor. Everything had been sanitized, erased, but someone had missed this, or burned it too late. That same night back in Chicago, Sarah received a phone call from a restricted number. She answered before the first ring ended. Yes, this is Sarah. This is Inspector Aslan Ismail, Royal Malaysian Police. I've just come from the location your sister was last seen. Did you find anything? Please, anything. The building is empty, abandoned, possibly within the last 48 hours. No clinic license, no medical records. However, he paused. I found a partially destroyed intake form. It has your sister's name. Sarah nearly dropped the phone. So she was really there? Yes, ma'am. At least her paperwork was. It confirms she arrived. But where she was taken next, we do not know yet. Oh my God. I have sent the document to the embassy. They will coordinate with your authorities. I am also initiating a search of nearby medical storage facilities and non-registered surgical units. This may take time. Sarah's voice trembled. What are you saying, Inspector? I believe this was a front, and your sister may have been transferred. Transferred where? Possibly out of Kuala Lumpur. Possibly to the north. What Aslan didn't say on that first call, but recorded in his private notes, was that the alley behind the clinic had no security cameras, but the neighboring property, a small electronics repair shop, did. He returned early the next morning, spoke with the owner, and reviewed footage from the night of June 7th. And there it was. At 11:28 p.m., a dark blue van pulled into the alley. 2 men exited through the side door of the Horizon Clinic, carrying something wrapped in white linens on a stretcher. They moved swiftly, mechanically. One held the clinic door open while the other loaded the body-shaped bundle into the back of the van. No one stopped them, no alarms, no rush. The van drove off and disappeared into Kuala Lumpur traffic. There was no timestamp malfunction on the footage, but the shop owner remembered the date clearly. That was the night the power went out for 10 minutes. I had to reset all my equipment the next morning. That was enough for Aslan. He noted the van's license plate, partially visible, WKL 8 Froth, the first lead. The license plate captured in the grainy alleyway footage was only partial. WKL 8 Froth. The last two characters obscured by glare from the van's rear lights. But for Inspector Aslan, it was enough to start pulling threads. He submitted the plate fragment to the Road Transport Department, requesting a list of all vehicles registered in Kuala Lumpur that matched the visible pattern. He also flagged it to the Anti-Human Trafficking Division, marking the case as urgent. Within 24 hours, the list came back. 14 vans matched the partial plate. Only 4 were dark blue models, and only one had a registration that had been suspended as of 3 weeks earlier. That van was registered under the name Yorn Rashid Osman, a known associate in prior medical licensing fraud investigations. He had no fixed clinic address. His business license had been revoked in 2015, but the van had never been recovered. Aslan's notes grew longer. Van with suspended license. Active in Kuala Lumpur days before victim's disappearance. Likely stolen or used under false registration. Track previous owners. Contact Human Trafficking Task Force. Request facial recognition on both men seen in footage. He printed the still image of the 2 men carrying the body-wrapped stretcher. It was blurry, but one face turned briefly toward the camera. That would be enough for the system. Back in Chicago, Sarah's timeline had grown into a full-blown investigative file. She had created folders labeled Jessica's flight details, messages, embassy correspondence, medical research, organ trafficking reports. She wasn't sleeping. She wasn't eating. She had found a report from 2015 written by an NGO based in Amsterdam, documenting at least 23 foreign nationals who had disappeared in Southeast Asia after arranging low-cost cosmetic surgeries. Most were women. Most were traveling alone. 4 were confirmed dead. 2 were found in shallow graves. 1 was discovered in a cargo container in Cambodia with stitches but no kidneys. The rest were still missing, and every single one of them had been lured through targeted ads, travel blogs, or medical tourism forums, just like Jessica. On June 12th, 5 days after Jessica's disappearance, Inspector Aslan received a message from the facial recognition team. One match identified. Subject, Hafiz Mokhtar, former military, current employment unknown, suspected enforcer for a Kuala Lumpur-based syndicate involved in cross-border trafficking operations, last seen in Alor Setar near the border with Thailand. That was in the north, exactly where Aslan feared she'd been taken. He filed a new report, requested clearance to travel north, and wrote one final sentence in his notes that evening. The van may be the key. If we find it, we find where she went. The flight from Kuala Lumpur to Alor Setar took just over an hour. Inspector Aslan stared out the window as the city lights gave way to a vast sprawl of jungle-covered hills and mist-shrouded lowlands. Somewhere beneath that haze was the town of Alor Setar, Malaysia's northernmost gateway, pressed up against the border with Thailand, a place known less for its beauty and more for the things that crossed it: people, weapons, organs. By the time he arrived at the local police outpost, the air was thick with humidity and suspicion. Alor Setar wasn't a tourist town. It was a transit point with a long history of looking the other way. He presented his paperwork to the commanding officer, who nodded but offered little help. "You're here about the foreign woman?" "Yes, Jessica Thornton. We haven't heard anything, but if she came through here, she's gone." Aslan had heard that phrase before. It meant, don't ask too many questions. That night, he reviewed the files again, the van's partial plate, the face of Hafiz Mokhtar, the timestamps, the terrain. He marked 3 possible routes the van could have taken from Kuala Lumpur to Alor Setar, each one remote, largely unmonitored, with long stretches of wilderness, and nothing. At 2:45 a.m., a call came in. We found a van abandoned in a field outside Changlun, just south of the border. The registration plate had been removed, the interior stripped, no fingerprints, but it was a match. Dark blue van, same make and model, same year. And in the back seat, tucked beneath the rubber matting, a single item had been left behind. A torn piece of paper, one edge bore the corner of a logo, Horizon Medical Wellness Center. It was the last physical remnant tying the vehicle and whoever drove it to Jessica's disappearance. Back in Chicago, Sarah received an early morning email from the U.S. Embassy. We have reason to believe the vehicle used in your sister's transportation has been located in northern Malaysia. It was found abandoned. Investigation continues. Authorities now believe she may have been moved across the border. Sarah sat in silence. If Jessica was across the border, in Thailand, Myanmar, or beyond, she was no longer just missing. She was in a different world entirely. Meanwhile, Inspector Aslan traveled north, following a narrow dirt road into the jungle. The coordinates had come from an anonymous informant. At the end of the road, barely visible beneath overgrowth, he found what he was looking for. A makeshift structure. Concrete walls, metal roof, no signage, generator powered, cold, and inside, 2 surgical tables, one with dried blood on its edges, the other still wet. The structure was crude but functional. Hidden behind a thicket of bamboo and brush, it looked like an unfinished storage shed at first glance. Just one more relic tucked away in the green silence of northern Malaysia. But inside, Inspector Aslan found no tools, no farming equipment, just the unmistakable smell of surgical-grade antiseptic mixed with rust and decay. He stepped cautiously into the dim interior, his flashlight cutting a narrow path through the shadows. The room was cool, unnaturally so, thanks to a humming industrial unit fixed into the back wall. The air was still, stale, and thick with memory. 2 stainless steel tables stood at the center. One was stained dark along the edges, dry, abandoned. The other had fresh streaks of red, smeared as if someone had wiped it in a rush. Or not at all. Near the corner, a surgical tray sat atop a metal cart. Several tools had been left behind. A scalpel, clamps, surgical gloves, and something else. A clear plastic bag, sealed with a label, partially faded but still legible in English. THN 0608. Aslan froze. He checked the timeline. Jessica Thornton was scheduled for surgery on June 8, 2017. The lettering matched her initials. The date matched her disappearance. It wasn't a body part, not this bag. It contained personal effects, a silver bracelet, a lipstick tube, and a small blood-stained cloth that looked like it had been torn from a shirt. It was evidence, proof that Jessica had been here, alive, at least for a time. He took photographs, careful not to disturb anything. Then he radioed the local unit for immediate isolation of the site. But before they could arrive, a sound echoed from the trees outside. A vehicle. He killed the flashlight and stepped away from the window. The vehicle never approached. It stopped at a distance, then turned, fled. Someone had been watching the facility. Back at the embassy, Sarah received the most difficult message of all. Miss Thornton. A facility was found near the northern border. Personal items consistent with your sister's possessions were recovered. We cannot confirm her current status, but we now have official grounds to escalate this as a transnational human trafficking case. Sarah dropped the phone onto the kitchen table, her hands shaking. She was there, she whispered to no one. She was really there. Her worst fear had just become confirmed fact. Jessica wasn't missing. She had been taken. The building had been sealed within hours. Local authorities, now working under federal directive, guarded its perimeter while evidence was collected. Inspector Aslan oversaw the scene personally, aware that if they waited too long, someone would return to erase what they'd missed. But this time, they were too late to erase everything. In a locked metal cabinet behind a false wall panel, he found a file folder, thick, weather-worn, labeled only with the initials HMW, client logs. He opened it. Dozens of printed intake forms, some half complete, others with scribbled annotations in Malay and English. Not all bore names, some used aliases, others had no photographs, but the details were consistent. Gender, female nationality, USA, AUS, CAN, UK, Frey procedure. Requested rhinoplasty, liposuction, breast augmentation, facelift clinic, Horizon Medical Wellness Center, status transferred. The last column chilled him. Transferred. It appeared beside at least 31 names. Some were crossed out. Others had arrows pointing to notes like Penang facility full, moved to border site, hold for 72 Oberst, donor match pending. Schedule for pickup, 2 a.m., Thai, courier confirmed, cache cleared. He reached the final few pages. There, scrawled between entries, was one name that stopped his breath. Thornton J. Facial work confirmed, hold for exam. OG or 08. No discharge date, no follow-up note, no transferred, just her name, and silence. Back in Chicago, Sarah forwarded the new findings to a contact she'd made at Global Justice Initiative, a nonprofit that tracked organ trafficking across Southeast Asia. Within 12 hours, they responded with chilling clarity. The use of cosmetic surgery clinics as recruitment points for trafficking is well documented in regions of Malaysia, Thailand, and Cambodia. Victims are often foreigners seeking procedures at unusually low costs. They are sedated under false pretenses and moved to clandestine facilities. Outcomes vary. Some are trafficked across borders. Others are used for illicit organ transplants coordinated through by black market brokers operating out of Bangkok, Phnom Penh, or rural Malaysia. This pattern matches confirmed activity from 2012-2016. Then came the line that hit Sarah hardest. Less than 8% of those taken in this pattern are ever found alive. Inspector Aslan made copies of the file, sending it to both the embassy and Interpol. He kept the original sealed in a personal vault. He didn't trust the system. That night, as he reviewed the names again, he noticed a code scribbled in the corner of Jessica's page. TX14, North, Hold. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he would find out. And when he did, the trail would lead him to the final place Jessica was ever seen alive. The code was brief. TX14, North Hold, scrawled in faded ink beside Jessica's name on the transfer log. At first glance, it seemed like a case number, maybe an internal reference, but something about the word North Hold pulled at Inspector Aslan. He searched through archive reports, transportation records, and maps. There was no official facility by that name, no clinic, no hospital, no military site. Nothing with the designation North Hold in the Malaysian Medical Registry, nothing in immigration logs. But when he cross-referenced it with the Anti-Trafficking Task Force database, he found a match, buried deep in a classified memo from 4 years earlier. Nhold, suspected code name used by cross-border syndicates to identify temporary holding structures in the Northern Corridor region, Malaysia, Thailand, Myanmar. Unregulated, often mobile, associated with pre-op containment of high-value individuals pending organ sale. It wasn't a place, it was a system. A name used to mask locations that moved frequently, hidden in rural areas disguised as farms, warehouses, houses, or even temples under renovation. He narrowed his search to locations within 150 kilometers of Alor Setar that fit that profile. 4 sites emerged. Only one had been abandoned recently. When Aslan arrived, it was raining. The road was barely a road, just 2 tire grooves in the mud leading toward a structure half covered in camouflage netting. A dog barked from inside a cage. A generator buzzed in the distance. No signs, no gate. But when he entered, he knew. He was in a North Hold. The interior was divided into 4 rooms. 3 were empty. The 4th was not. It held 6 steel beds, each with wrist and ankle restraints, chains on the floor, hooks in the ceiling, IV stands with expired bags still hanging, and on the far wall, scratched faintly into the concrete, barely legible unless the light hit it just right. OG, you're 8. I'm still here. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a record, a timestamp, proof that Jessica Thornton had been alive in that room after the day she was supposed to wake up from surgery. He photographed everything, collected samples, sealed the space, but he already knew it would be gone within days, cleared out, wiped clean, like every other North hold before it. Back at the station, he submitted the findings. The embassy issued a new classification: status, presumed captive, high risk. And Sarah received a call she would never forget. We have reason to believe your sister was alive for at least 72 hours after her disappearance. But the trail grows cold beyond this point. We will continue to investigate, but you should prepare for every possibility. She didn't cry. She stared out the window for a long time. Then she opened her laptop, created a new folder, and labeled it North Hold, Jessica's Final Days. The deeper Inspector Aslan dug into the mechanics of the trafficking ring, the clearer one thing became. No operation of this scale moved without couriers. While doctors and clinics fronted the illusion, couriers were the ghosts, tasked with quietly transporting victims between sites, across borders, through checkpoints, and into the hands of those who paid for organs in cash. If Jessica had been moved from the Horizon Clinic to North Hold, someone had driven her. Not the clinic staff, not the fake doctor. Someone who did this often, efficient, disposable, invisible. He returned to the partial surveillance footage from the Kuala Lumpur alley, the frame showing 2 men loading a stretcher into the dark blue van. One face had already been identified, Hafiz Mokhtar. But the other, the one in the driver's seat waiting behind the wheel, never seen leaving the van, that was the courier. It took days to trace even a clue. Then it came from an unexpected source, a non-profit medical volunteer stationed near the Malaysia-Thailand border who had once treated an injured man who claimed to move people for a living. He had showed up with a dislocated shoulder and refused to give a name, but what he did say stuck. They don't scream if they're sedated, right? The doctor remembered a patch on his jacket, a yellow scorpion, not military, not police, but identical to one seen in a photo Aslan had collected from another case file weeks earlier, a photo showing a group of men loading boxes into a refrigerated truck on a jungle road. It wasn't cargo, it was people. With help from Interpol and a tip from the Anti-Human Trafficking Division, they put a name to the face. Arif Zulkifli. Age 39. Former Malaysian Army logistics specialist. Expelled for unlicensed cross-border activity. Last seen operating in the Perlis region, a known organ trade corridor. Arif had no known address. No bank accounts, only sightings. And a pattern. Wherever victims vanished, he passed through days later. He wasn't a surgeon, he wasn't a killer, he was the one who delivered. Inspector Aslan requested permission to intercept Arif through local informants. It would be off the record. No uniform, no backup, just a chance. And on a humid night in late June, after tracking a tip to an old border village, Aslan spotted him, sitting at an outdoor food stall, eating grilled chicken, laughing, wearing the same yellow scorpion patch. Inspector Aslan remained seated in the parked car across the street. Engine off. Windows cracked. The village of Kampung Ayer was quiet, lit only by flickering street lamps and the neon hum of a nearby drink stand. Arif Zulkifli sat in full view. Same build, same face, same yellow scorpion patch sewn into the shoulder of a worn jacket. He was flanked by 2 other men, both younger, both heavily tattooed. They spoke casually, but Aslan knew what this was. A shield. He radioed no one. This wasn't an official mission. His superiors had denied the warrant, citing lack of physical evidence and risk to diplomatic relations. But Aslan had already made his choice. He stepped out of the car. As he crossed the narrow road, Arif saw him. Their eyes locked. Aslan didn't speak. He simply flashed his badge. "You're Arif Zulkifli. I need you to come with me." Arif didn't flinch. He didn't deny it. You must be Inspector Aslan, he said slowly, rising. You've been asking about the American, Jessica Thornton. Aslan stared at him. Where is she? Arif looked at the ground and exhaled through his nose. They told me someone would come. Before Aslan could respond, one of the younger men stood up, placing a hand on his hip, revealing the glint of a concealed blade. Aslan raised his voice slightly. You interfere, you go to prison. Move now, and you go free. Tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to drop. Arif put a hand on the man's arm and shook his head. Let it go. They walked in silence for 3 blocks until they reached the edge of the village, a broken shack behind a closed rice depot. No cameras, no ears. Inside, Aslan shut the door. Where is she? Arif sat down, lighting a cigarette. She was never supposed to go north. Then who rerouted her? Buyer changed. Big payout, American kidney. Young, clean, perfect match. Aslan's stomach tightened. So she's dead. Arif exhaled smoke and shrugged. I don't know. You delivered her. I did, but I don't stay once the doors close. Aslan slammed his hand on the table. Where? Border compound, not Thailand. Golden Triangle, free zone, Thai side. You won't find it. Nobody finds it. Aslan leaned in. Then tell me who runs it. Arif took one final drag, then crushed the cigarette on the table. You don't want that name. And if I give it, I don't walk out of this shack. He stood slowly. You can arrest me, or you can find your girl. Then, without warning, Arif walked out the back door, disappearing into the mist. 2 motorbikes flared to life in the distance. Aslan didn't follow. He sat in silence, then wrote in his notebook, Jessica Thornton rerouted to Golden Triangle free zone. Thai side. No confirmation of death. Risk of exposure. Syndicate active. Operation bigger than assumed. He underlined one word twice. Alive. The Golden Triangle. Free zone wasn't on most maps. Officially, it was an economic corridor, a cluster of warehouses, trade depots, and transport companies along the Mekong River on the Thailand-Laos-Myanmar border, designed to promote logistics and export efficiency. Unofficially, it was something else entirely. A gray zone. No formal checkpoints, no consistent inspections, and just far enough from the eyes of all 3 governments to serve a different kind of commerce. Black market medical operations, human trafficking, organ trade. Inspector Aslan had heard whispers of it for years, stories from border agents, missing persons reports that dead-ended at the river, occasional NGO reports redacted before publication. Now he had a name, and Jessica's trail led straight there. He filed an internal memorandum submitting a cross-border intelligence request to the Malaysia-Thailand Joint Operations Bureau. He knew the answer would take weeks, possibly months, possibly never. So he went off record through an old university contact now working as a field analyst for a European aid group. He secured satellite scans of the area. The Golden Triangle was alive. Trucks came and went. At least 4 buildings matched the known structure of illegal organ prep centers. No windows, rear loading docks, adjacent to unmarked refrigeration containers, surrounded by no man's land. In one photo, time-stamped June 12th, a dark blue van was visible. Same make, model as the one Jessica had been transported in. Same color, same scrape on the rear bumper. He zoomed in on the image until it blurred. She was here, he said aloud. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Sarah sat across from a CNN reporter in a small office behind a community center. She wasn't supposed to speak publicly yet. The embassy had urged her to stay quiet, to avoid disrupting international cooperation. But she couldn't anymore. She handed over Jessica's photo, a copy of the Horizon website, and a full printed timeline. I think people need to know what's happening. She's not the only one. She just didn't expect it to happen to her. The reporter leaned forward. Do you believe she's still alive? Sarah didn't blink. Yes. I don't care what the numbers say. I feel it. I think they're keeping her for a reason. And if that's true, I still have time. That night, the article went live. Missing American woman may be victim of organ trafficking in Southeast Asia. Sister says she won't stop until she's found. It spread fast across the world. In a quiet apartment in Chiang Mai, a retired nurse opened her email. The photo in the article made her freeze. Jessica Thornton, she whispered. She remembered the name. She had seen the intake form. She had helped sedate her. Her name was Somchai Narong, 54 years old, retired nurse, former surgical assistant at a government hospital in Chiang Rai. She lived alone in a small apartment above a laundromat, her pension barely enough to cover rent. She hadn't worn scrubs in 6 years. But in June of 2017, she'd taken a one-time job off the books, cash payment, no questions. A former colleague had reached out, just a short assignment, monitoring vitals, helping with sedation. A private clinic, foreign clients, good money. She said yes, and it haunted her every night since. When she saw Jessica's face on the CNN article, framed beside the words, "suspected trafficking victim," she froze in her chair. She remembered the girl, quiet, pale, American, strapped to a surgical table in a cold room, heart rate steady, eyes fluttering under sedation. Somchai hadn't known the details, not at first. But when she noticed the blood vials, the cooling units, the absence of proper monitoring equipment, she knew it wasn't cosmetic surgery. She had helped prep 3 women that night. Only one name had stayed with her. Jessica Thornton. It took her a full day to decide. Then she bought a cheap prepaid phone, called an old hospital contact in Chiang Rai, and asked for a safe way to reach the embassy. 3 days later, she was face-to-face with Inspector Aslan, under full protection. She spoke in a whisper, hands trembling. "I didn't know they were going to take her organs. I swear to you, I thought maybe just trafficking. Not this, not this." "Did you see her alive?" "Yes, breathing, but sedated deeply. They kept her in a separate room. I gave her fluids. They said she was valuable, American, rare blood type, young, matched with a man from Singapore, I think." "Did you see the operation?" "No, they sent me away before it began." "Do you know if she survived?" Somchai hesitated, swallowed. I heard the surgeon say something in English. He said, 'Don't damage the kidney. She has a second buyer lined up if the first backs out.'" Aslan stared at her. "Second buyer?" "Yes, they were keeping her alive until delivery." That was it. Confirmation. Jessica hadn't been killed immediately. She was being held, preserved, for sale. Aslan filed an emergency cross-border intervention request. Interpol upgraded Jessica's file to critical hostage organ trade victim. Thai and Malaysian authorities began mobilizing undercover agents around the Golden Triangle Free Zone. For the first time, the case was officially international, and the clock was now louder than ever. The term second buyer echoed through every agency brief that week. Organ trafficking networks, especially those operating out of Southeast Asia, didn't work like black market auctions on the dark web. They operated with waiting lists, coded dossiers, and human brokers who matched high-paying recipients with captive donors. If Jessica Thornton had been designated for a transplant, it meant her blood type, organ health, and background had already been analyzed and logged. And if a second buyer existed, it meant the first either backed out, died, or was outbid. Through coordination with a liaison from the Singaporean Ministry of Health, Inspector Aslan quietly submitted a request. Any known citizens with records of foreign medical procedures pending kidney transplant, seeking off-registry organ replacement between June-August 2017. The reply came 3 days later. One name stood out: Dr. Tan Wei Chen, age 63, retired pharmaceutical executive, net worth estimated $38 million, diagnosed with renal failure. On transplant waitlist in 2016, removed due to travel abroad for alternative procedure in July 2017, recovered fully by September. Officially, he claimed to have received a transplant in Zurich, but Swiss authorities confirmed No record, no surgeon, no clinic. He had lied. Interpol launched a formal inquiry. Through financial tracing, they located a series of payments made from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, transferred on June 10, 2017, 3 days after Jessica's disappearance, to an entity registered in Chiang Rai, Thailand. The recipient was a shell company, but the physical address was unmistakable. Golden Triangle Free Zone, Sector 9C. Same zone. Same building captured in the satellite images, same area where Jessica's trail went cold. It all pointed to one thing. Jessica Thornton had been kept alive long enough to become a commodity, and someone had paid to make her disappear piece by piece. Inspector Aslan read the memo again and again, but what gnawed at him wasn't just the confirmation, it was the timing. Dr. Tan's recovery had taken place in early September 2017. Which meant the transplant may not have happened until August, which meant Jessica could have been held captive for nearly 2 months, drugged, restrained, prepped, waiting, and even worse, she may have survived the procedure. Because kidney donors don't always die immediately, especially when the removal is partial. In Chicago, Sarah received the update with trembling hands. "What are you telling me?" she asked the embassy officer over the phone. "There is a possibility, however small, that Jessica may have been used as a partial kidney donor. There's no confirmation of her death." "Then what do we do now?" "Now we find the transport manifest. Every patient has a courier. Every body has a paper trail. We follow it." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then we keep going, no matter how deep this gets." The Golden Triangle Free Zone was notoriously immune to scrutiny. Dozens of warehouses, minimal customs enforcement, and private logistics firms working under layered corporate shells. Most of the traffic was legal: textiles, electronics, agricultural equipment. But some of it wasn't, and tucked within the cross-border shipping logs from July and August of 2017, a single line in a scanned spreadsheet caught Inspector Aslan's attention. It read, Manifest 447B, Medical Transfer, Human Non-Citizen, Lundwer 38. Live departure, Sector 9C, Golden Triangle Free Zone. Arrival, undisclosed medical facility, West River Corridor. Date, August 9th, 2017. Courier, Zulkifli Logistics. There it was again. Zulkifli. The same surname as Arif Zulkifli, the courier who had disappeared weeks earlier. The recipient was redacted, and the date lined up almost exactly, 9 weeks after her disappearance. She had still been alive, and according to this manifest, she had been moved. The term non-citizen, or 38 live, had only one meaning in the trafficking index: a living human asset in containment status, fit for transport, but not medically stable. Aslan filed, circled the line, and slid it into Jessica's folder. He closed his eyes. In 15 years as an officer, he had never seen a clearer thread. But it still wasn't enough. He needed a destination. He called in a favor from a contact in the Thai border force, who had quietly aided in the investigation since the satellite images had surfaced. Together, they traced shipping records associated with Zulkifli Logistics. Only a few vehicles left Sector 9C that week. One truck crossed into Chiang Rai, then disappeared from tracking, but the contact had heard whispers. There was a private compound, disguised as a wellness retreat, tucked into the forest outside the city. Officially, it offered traditional medicine detox packages for elite travelers. In reality, it had no tourist reviews, no public marketing, no real patients. Locals called it the Stone House. "They say the ones who go in don't come back," the officer said. "Did anyone foreign go in during early August?" Aslan asked. The man was quiet. A truck arrived with a containment box, escorted by 3 men. No license plate, no paperwork, all dark. That same day, helicopter arrived at midnight. Left before dawn, no records. Aslan's hand trembled as he wrote into his field report, Stone House. Probable terminal point for Manifest 447B. If she left alive, it was from there. If she died, it happened inside those walls. He paused, then added one more line. No body has been recovered. The road to the compound was steep, cut into the hillside like a forgotten scar. Dense forest pressed in from all sides, the canopy overhead filtering the morning sun into narrow blades of gold and shadow. Inspector Aslan rode in the back of a dust-covered SUV, flanked by 2 Thai officers, both silent. They had a search warrant, technically. Unofficially, the stone house wasn't supposed to exist. From the outside, it looked peaceful, traditional architecture, bamboo walls, sloped tile roof. A wooden sign at the gate read, "Serenity Garden Healing Retreat." But there were no guests. No bookings, no staff outside, just a single locked gate and the faint scent of antiseptic on the wind. Inside, the story changed. The compound was divided into 2 wings, one that resembled an actual retreat with mats, incense, and soft lighting. The other was clinical, cold, windowless. Aslan walked with care through the hallway marked "Private Ward, Access Only." What he found would haunt him for years. 7 rooms, all empty, but the marks were there. Straps bolted into bed frames, a drain in the center of the floor, medical tubing in a bin, some stained dark. And in the rearmost room, one that had been hastily cleared, a wall still bore a faint handwritten label in permanent marker. C3, U.S. female, kidney tissue, clean. The walls were soundproofed. The cameras had been removed, but wires remained. And in a locked metal drawer, Aslan found a folder labeled 447B. Inside, a copy of Jessica's intake form, a blood work summary, a note reading, "Ready for harvest, scheduled 8 to 9, confirm helicopter window." That was it. No body, no official death certificate, no confirmation of procedure completion, just documentation. Clean, cold, final. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, Sarah sat in her apartment silent, reading the scanned files the embassy had forwarded. She stared at her sister's name at the top of the page. Thornton, Jessica, status, cleared for extraction. Tears came, but not the kind that broke. They were sharp, contained. "So she really got that far," she whispered. "They really used her." She looked over at the growing stack of documents on her kitchen table, her own private case file, thicker now than most criminal court dockets. Then she said what she'd been holding in for weeks. "They're not going to bury this." Inspector Aslan returned to Kuala Lumpur with the file and a signed statement from the Thai officers confirming the contents of the stone house. Interpol opened a sealed case under the heading, International Victim ID 891. Thornton, status, presumed organ extraction, survival unknown, body not recovered. It wasn't closure, but it was a record. Jessica Thornton's name would not vanish into the anonymous ledgers of the black market. She had existed, she had been taken, and now the world knew. Weeks passed. The Stonehouse compound was quietly dismantled by local officials. The furniture was sold. The medical equipment disappeared. No arrests were made. The building itself burned down in a suspicious fire less than a month later. The official cause was listed as electrical fault. Inspector Aslan didn't believe that, neither did Sarah. The international press cycle, once hungry for details, had already begun to move on. New conflicts, new scandals, new faces. Jessica's name faded from headlines, but not from the investigation. Interpol's report remained open, labeled pending forensic confirmation, body not located. But the deeper Aslan looked, the more he realized there may never be a body. That was the final cruelty of organ trafficking rings like this. They left behind nothing, no grave, no ashes, no answers, only documents, only systems, only silence. Sarah, however, refused silence. She partnered with 3 other families, both of whom had lost daughters to suspicious disappearances in Southeast Asia in recent years. Together, they created a platform, the Jessica Thornton Initiative. Its goal was simple: share real stories, publish known clinic fronts, pressure governments, track medical tourism loopholes used by traffickers. She appeared on Dateline, BBC World News, and local stations in Illinois. Each time she held Jessica's photo. Each time she looked into the camera and said, "She didn't die quietly. She didn't vanish by accident. She was stolen, sold, and processed like inventory. And there are hundreds more like her." Back in Malaysia, Inspector Aslan continued his work. One night, while reviewing unrelated documents tied to illegal courier networks, he came across a scan of an old ledger. A name jumped out, THN, transfer marked incomplete, dated August 11th, 2017. 2 days after the scheduled procedure. It didn't match the other records, he double-checked. In the margin, a courier had scribbled a note. Delay. Order cancelled mid-prep. Container rerouted. Patient in cold hold. Aslan froze. It wasn't confirmation, it wasn't proof, but it was enough to reopen the possibility. He sent the scan to Sarah with a single message. "There's one file that says she may not have been processed. Still trying to confirm. Don't lose hope." Sarah stared at the screen. Her sister had vanished over 8 months ago. Her heart said Jessica was gone, but something deeper whispered, "Keep looking." Patient in cold hold. 3 words written in the margins of a faded transport log. No signature, no timestamp, no further detail. But for Inspector Aslan, it was enough. He had seen the term before. Rare, but real. Cold hold was trafficking slang. It referred to a state of prolonged medical suspension, used only in cases where a donor's condition was to be preserved for transport, negotiation, or delayed procedure. Victims placed in cold hold weren't dead. They weren't conscious either. They were sedated, intubated, and monitored, frozen in time, waiting for a sale, and sometimes waiting for a buyer that never came. If Jessica Thornton had been placed in cold hold on August 11th, 2017, that meant her initial extraction was called off, which also meant there was a window, a critical 24 to 72-hour period where she was still alive, stored, sedated, and being rerouted. The question was, where did she go? Aslan traced the manifest point of origin, Sector 9C, and compared it with shipping clearance stamps at the Chiang Rai checkpoint. A single code from August 12th stood out. Medical cargo, non-standard, redirected to Bangkok under diplomatic seal. That seal, it belonged to a Ihwal Betom foreign consulate. Which one wasn't listed? But through a confidential source, he discovered that in the days following Jessica's missed extraction, a refrigerated medical container was logged at Suvarnabhumi Airport with clearance for private air transfer. Destination, unknown passenger, none listed. Cargo, cryogenic preservation unit, human tissue integrity, classified. Aslan's heart sank. If she had been moved again by air, she could be anywhere. Singapore, Hong Kong, Middle East, Eastern Europe. It was the last ghost in the chain, the last place where her name might exist if the logs weren't forged. He circled one note scribbled beside the airway bill code. Consulate Aid 0058, clearance issued, temporary bio-custody. A loophole, a legal bypass designed for diplomatic transport of bodies, but used in this case for something uncertain. Back in Chicago, Sarah received the update. She didn't know what to make of it. "So you're saying she was alive after they canceled the procedure?" "That's what the log suggests." "Then where is she?" "We don't know, but we now believe she was moved again under false documentation." "So she's gone?" "No," Aslan said, "she was moved, which means somewhere she's still recorded, even if hidden." Sarah paused, then said quietly, "Then I'll find that record. I don't care if it takes years." The case file, now over 100 pages, remained open. Still no body, still no death certificate, but now a possibility that Jessica Thornton was not only taken, not only sold, but perhaps still held, still sedated, still alive. In the world of illegal medicine, victims don't have names. They have codes, series, classes, blood types, status levels, and in the case of Jessica Thornton, missing American presumed kidney donor turned international medical ghost, she was likely filed away as a number somewhere. Sarah knew this. After 10 months of fighting bureaucracy, begging consulates, confronting journalists, and trading information with NGOs, she had learned the cruel truth. If Jessica was alive, she wasn't being treated like a person. She was classified inventory. So Sarah changed her approach. She stopped searching Google. She stopped refreshing forums. Instead, she began contacting medical software engineers, the kind who knew how to read hospital procurement logs, shipment tracking data, and what's hidden behind the APIs of surgical record systems in less regulated countries. She found a pair of retired systems analysts, brothers, ex-military contractors who specialized in dark network detection. They asked for every document she had. She sent it all. They went to work. Meanwhile, in Kuala Lumpur, Inspector Aslan filed an official request to UNODC, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, asking for permission to search the Central Surgical Registry Exchange, a back-end network known only to customs and port authorities. Most governments didn't bother looking, but he wasn't most officers. A week later, access was granted, and buried in the data, tucked beneath false names and scrambled shipping IDs, he found a code that didn't belong. Patient code, TX14THN origin, Malaysia transfer. Type, medical containment status, frozen custody, private, AVO-UN. Glared. Hold, Nov, 17. Location, redacted. He stared at the screen. TX14, THN. He knew the code. He'd seen it written next to her name months earlier in a basement beneath a clinic that never existed, and now here it was live in a database, marked as hold. He called Sarah immediately. I think I found her record. What do you mean record? It's not a person, it's not a file, it's a medical designation, but it's still marked active. It's her code, TX14THN. So she's in a system. Yes, somewhere. Sarah's voice broke for the first time in weeks. Then that means she's not dead. It means she's still listed, and that's not nothing. But as Aslan went to export the record, access denied. Seconds later, the code vanished from the live registry, wiped, archived, encrypted. Someone was watching. Inspector Aslan stared at the screen. One moment the code was there, TX14THN, flagged in yellow. The next, access denied, session timed out, record not found. He logged back in, searched again, nothing. He ran the original query parameters, origin, Malaysia, date range, June-November 2017, patient status, medical containment. The result count dropped from 53 to 52. Her record had been erased. He called the UNODC contact. Someone just deleted a live record from your internal system while I was inside it. Are you sure it wasn't archived? I had the code in front of me. I had it for 7 seconds. There was a pause. Then someone high level saw you looking. What does that mean for her? It means you just triggered an alert, and they're going to cover whatever's left. In Chicago, Sarah received the news in silence. No yelling, no crying, just silence. She opened the photo album on her desk, the one she never looked at anymore. Inside, Jessica at age 6 in a red dress, then at 15 with braces and her graduation cap, then at 30 asleep on the couch, her cat curled up beside her knees. She turned the page. There was a blank slot, one meant for something that never came, a return photo. They deleted her, she said out loud, not from the world, not from memory, but from the system that was supposed to hold accountability. That was worse. That night, she posted a letter on the Thornton Initiatives page. It was short, and it went viral. My sister Jessica was not just taken, she was erased, digitally, officially, silently. And if they can do that to her, they can do it to anyone. So if you're reading this and you lost someone the same way, we see you, we believe you, and we won't let them disappear your story too. She ended it with a single line. She still exists somewhere, even if it's only in defiance. Back in Kuala Lumpur, Inspector Aslan closed Jessica's case folder. He didn't close the case because something in him, something quiet, something stubborn, refused to write the final words. Case closed. Instead, he picked up a pen and wrote something else. Record erased by force. That means someone's still protecting what happened. Then he added one more sentence alone on the last page, which means she still matters. The building was nothing special, a 2-story structure tucked between a dry cleaner and a shuttered bookstore in Oak Park, Illinois. But inside, the second floor had been turned into something that didn't exist anywhere else in the world. A memorial for the vanished, a room of the erased. Sarah Thornton stood in the center, surrounded by photographs, printouts, maps, and red string lines pinned to corkboards. Each wall had one thing in common: names. Sophia, last seen in Manila. Claire, vanished in Phuket, Elena. Missing from Bali, Fatima. Lost in Ho Chi Minh City. Jessica Marie Thornton, Kuala Lumpur, June 2017. Some had photos, some only had initials, some had timelines that stopped mid-sentence. All had one thing missing: a body. They called it the Wall of Names. It wasn't just a tribute, it was a declaration, a message to the syndicates, to the embassies, to the cold bureaucratic systems that kept saying, insufficient evidence, no confirmation of death, case inactive. Sarah had printed those phrases too, framed them, hung them like warnings, and below each one in bold marker she'd written, still missing does not mean forgotten. Families came, volunteers came, journalists came, even former diplomats quietly slipped in and offered documents they couldn't legally share. And in a binder marked TX14, Sarah kept every page related to Jessica's case, one for every chapter, organized, protected, open to anyone who wanted to know the truth. Back in Malaysia, Inspector Aslan received a small package in the mail. No return address, just a worn manila envelope. Inside was a photograph, black and white, grainy. A woman in a wheelchair, head shaved, mask over her face, tubes on her arms. The photo was dated November 2017. Location unverified, possible UAE. Written on the back, subject TX14 was diverted, confirmed survival, no extraction performed. It wasn't closure, but it was something else. Hope. Aslan faxed the photo to Sarah without a word. She stared at it for hours. Then she walked to the wall of names, and for the first time in nearly a year, she picked up a marker, returned to Jessica's photo, and drew a circle around it. Then wrote underneath, status, survived. And next to that, we keep going. 6 months after Jessica's erased record vanished from the surgical registry, a ping came from an unexpected source. A former Gulf-based procurement analyst, now working anonymously with a European watchdog group, had seen Sarah's post on the wall of Names Project and reached out quietly. He didn't offer much at first, only a sentence in an encrypted email. She may have passed through here, sort of frozen asset class, listed as TX, but not recorded as deceased. Sarah forwarded it to Aslan immediately. He responded within an hour. Asset class, TX, that matches. 2017 matches the reroute timeline. Where exactly is here? The reply took 2 days. Al Ain, UAE. Private medical annex connected to military contractor. Built in 2010, used briefly in 2017-2018 for experimental tissue procurement. It no longer operates under its original name, but the logs were stored. What the analyst provided next was a heavily redacted PDF. It had no names, only codes. But line 21 stood out. Case, TXF, cold entry, 2017 to West Samashur, hold time, 91 days. Status, removed. No outcome, filed. No declared outcome, no final procedure, no transfer of remains, no recipient confirmation, just removed. Aslan compared the timeline. October 14th, cold entry matches the final flight record out of Thailand. 91 days in containment takes us to early January 2018. He pulled the archived copy of the erased surgical code TX14THN. Entry, October 2017, vanished late December or early January. It was a perfect match. It meant only one thing. Jessica may have been kept alive in suspended condition for nearly 3 months, then moved, or something else. But even more disturbing, there was no proof she had died. And if she hadn't, Sarah read the report 10 times. Then she posted a quiet update on the Thornton Initiative. It read, "We now believe Jessica was alive through at least January 2018. We cannot confirm her status after that, but we have reason to believe she was placed into extended medical containment. She may have been moved again. She may still be listed. She may still be somewhere. Until there's a body, there's a chance." Jessica's story had long since outgrown the boundaries of a single case file. By early 2019, Sarah's apartment in Oak Park had transformed into something between a command center and a memorial. Binders stacked floor to ceiling, world maps covered in thumbtacks and thread, photographs framed not for display but for decoding. And then one day, staring at that wall of pins and notes, Sarah saw something different. Not chaos, not desperation, a pattern. She began reorganizing the map, not by where Jessica had been confirmed, but by where other missing women had vanished under nearly identical conditions. Same profile, solo travelers. Same goal, cosmetic procedures. Same regions, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam. Same end, no contact, no return, no body. When she laid the cases side by side, she saw it. A silent corridor cutting from Southeast Asia to the Persian Gulf, not in straight lines, but in movements. Movements of containers, movements of assets, movements of the unfound. She shared the map with Inspector Aslan. He studied it like a battlefield. "We're not looking at isolated crimes anymore," he told her. This was a system, a supply chain, and Jessica, she had been caught at its center. A month later, a contact from Médecins Sans Frontières reached out. He'd seen Sarah's map. He'd seen it before. Not the same names, but the same route. "We rescued 3 women in 2018 who matched the path you've drawn. Both were meant to be harvested. Both escaped before their final procedure." Sarah leaned forward. How did they survive? Mistake in transport. A power failure. One was sold twice. Conflict between buyers. They were dumped and recovered by locals. Neither had ID. One spoke only Portuguese. Were they American? No. Sarah's throat went dry. Then there's still a chance she was rerouted again. Or hidden. The contact replied, "Some victims who never sell are locked in private facilities. Not killed, not released, just held. Because the buyers don't want exposure. Because the victims are evidence." That night, Sarah wrote the phrase on the map in red, "Not missing, unfound." And across the world, Aslan followed a quiet lead in the form of a custom signature from an airfield near Muscat, Oman. The shipping number, it ended in 447B. He didn't know what he'd find yet, but the corridor hadn't closed, and Jessica Thornton somewhere was still on it. The Omani airfield was small, Al Kuwair Regional, used primarily for military logistics, private aircraft, and medical evacuations from isolated areas. When Inspector Aslan submitted a back-channel request through a diplomatic liaison, he wasn't expecting anything to come of it. Months had passed. Records were scrubbed, routes were concealed, but against all odds, a junior official responded. There was a container logged here in early 2018, arrived from UAE, coded as cryo-transport, marked BioTX447B. The code stopped him. 447B, Jessica's final manifest. Was it opened? No, it cleared inspection by consular override, moved to a private facility in the outskirts, sealed. Destination? A long-term care annex, privately owned, defunct now. The building had since been shuttered, its records sealed in international litigation. But satellite images from January 2018 showed something unexpected. 2 biocontainment units delivered to the facility under armed escort. One of them bore a serial number beginning in TX. Aslan submitted the number to Interpol's restricted biosurveillance registry. It pinged once, then vanished. Status: inactive. Last update: 2019. Outcome: undeclared. Back in Chicago, Sarah stared at the photograph that came with the report. The building was simple, concrete, isolated, surrounded by a fence, and there in the loading bay stood the unit, a white cylinder labeled in faded black, BioTX-7B, cold entry. Sarah whispered. That was her. She didn't need a body, not now. She had a serial number, she had evidence, she had a location. It wasn't confirmation of life, but it was confirmation of something far more valuable. Jessica Thornton hadn't just been moved. She had survived the system long enough to be catalogued, relocated, and preserved, which meant she may have lived through it longer than anyone imagined, longer than most ever did. Sarah updated the wall of names that same night. Next to Jessica's photo, under the red circled label, she added, Last Trace. Omen 2018. Case still active. If you've seen this code, 447B, contact us. She was real. She is real. She's not just a number, and we are not done. The story of Jessica Thornton was no longer just about one missing woman. It was about a code, a number stamped across borders, erased from systems, whispered in manifest ledgers, and reappearing where it shouldn't. BioTX-7B, and now, for the first time, the world was starting to notice. A forensic researcher in Belgium emailed Sarah after reading an exposé she'd helped publish in Le Monde Diplomatique. He had been part of an intergovernmental audit team that reviewed improperly imported biomedical units from the Gulf states between 2017 and 2019. He remembered a container, unmarked on the manifest, red flagged during the audit for lacking chain of custody verification. We logged it as abandoned, but never opened it. We were told it belonged to a now-defunct research sponsor with diplomatic protections. He shared the original scan of the log. There it was again. TX-447B, hold transfer, status, unclaimed date, October 2019, destination, undisclosed disposition, warehouse inventory, Brussels satellite facility, tag, do not open, custodial, hold. Sarah called Aslan as soon as she read the report. She made it that far, she said breathlessly, to Europe, over 2 years after she was taken. She's not a theory anymore. She's a survivor of the longest known illegal containment chain we've ever documented. Aslan, who had read thousands of trafficking reports, nodded silently. And she may still be alive, he said, somewhere in their archive, frozen, hidden, maybe even forgotten. Interpol launched a limited site inspection of the Brussels storage facility. The warehouse had changed hands 4 times. By the time authorities reached it in early 2020, the cold containment unit was gone. No invoice, no receiver signature, no disposal record, no body. Only the empty metal restraints on the pallet floor where the cryo unit once sat, and a faint imprint of the tag, TX-447B, do not open. Sarah updated the wall of names one more time. This time she printed the code itself, a text TX-447B, in large block letters. Underneath she wrote, She passed through Brussels, we know it. The container existed, the logs were real. That unit held my sister, and if it was never opened, then she may be out there, in some vault, in some basement, in someone's locked medical archive, waiting. In early 2020, an anonymous message reached the inbox of the Thornton Initiative. The sender used an encrypted server out of Turkey. The subject line was just 2 words, she lived. Attached was a scanned note, handwritten, photographed under poor light, dated 5 years prior. It read, TX-447B, female, cold entry, still viable. Signs of awareness, eyes open under sedation. Attempted movement. Noted request for extension. Denied, keep sealed. No name, no signature, no location. But Sarah had seen enough of these documents to know what was real. This one was real. And that meant at some point in her frozen journey, Jessica Thornton had regained consciousness. The phrase, eyes open under sedation, echoed in Aslan's head as he read the document. He had heard it once before, in a 2016 closed briefing on black market transplant failures. A whistleblower described patients who were sedated but woke too soon. They don't scream, he'd said, but their eyes move. They watch you. That's the worst part. Sarah went public. She didn't name the sender. She didn't name the facility, but she gave the press the phrase, "the girl in the freezer." It went viral. News outlets picked it up in waves. Was a missing American woman frozen alive in an illegal organ facility. The girl in the freezer, a global medical mystery. What happened to Asset 447B? For once, the public pressure reversed direction. Hospitals started checking their inventories. Private labs reported stolen units. Whistleblowers surfaced. And one, in particular, a former procurement driver in Prague, came forward with a simple line. "We stored her once. I don't know where she went after that. But she wasn't dead. I saw her breath fog the glass." Text 447B, high priority human cold hold, recovery possible. The case was no longer marked presumed dead. It was marked unresolved, evidence of life. Back at the wall of names, Sarah added a final pin. Red thread, new map, new target zone. She stood back and whispered the same words she had once said to no one. "We keep going." The tip came from a man named Jaroslav Mashek, 58 years old, Czech national, former logistics contractor for an unlicensed medical firm that operated out of Prague's industrial district between 2015 and 2019. He reached out to the Thornton Initiative through an encrypted line routed through Switzerland. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for protection. He just said, "I moved her." I didn't know who she was, not then, but I remember the code. It was painted on the side of the unit, TX447B, and she was still alive. Jaroslav met with an Interpol contact in Vienna under full confidentiality. What he described sent a ripple through every agency connected to the case. We had a sub-facility beneath a decommissioned textile plant outside Prague, cold vaults, medical containment, all off books. We received the unit in late 2019. It came from Brussels. I was the one who wheeled it in. How did you know she was alive? Because when I checked the frost seal, her eyes opened, just for a second, like she heard the metal moving. What happened after? 3 days later, the container was gone, taken out overnight. No paperwork, no driver log. They told me it was scrapped, but I don't believe it. Where do you think she went? East, maybe Russia, maybe somewhere colder, somewhere with fewer questions. Did you ever hear her name? No, but we all started calling her the same thing, without even planning it. What? The girl who wouldn't close her eyes. Interpol reopened a dormant medical trafficking file from Prague District 9. Inside, they found incomplete schematics of the textile plant's underground levels, blueprints matching Jaroslav's description of the cold vault unit. The vault had been decommissioned in 2020, but no official records existed of what had been stored there. Not one. Just a logistics ID that had been scratched into the concrete near the access ramp. 447B. Sarah received the full transcript from Interpol. She didn't react right away. She simply printed the phrase, "the girl who wouldn't close her eyes," and taped it beneath Jessica's photo. She no longer believed her sister was just a victim. She now believed she had become evidence. Evidence the system didn't want found. Evidence that kept surviving transfer after transfer. Evidence of a crime so deep it could only be hidden by keeping her frozen. They called the operation Red Ice. It was a code name used by Interpol's Internal Medical Crimes Unit to classify a series of rare cases where live human tissue, organs, or entire patients were kept in prolonged cryogenic hold, transported internationally without documentation, and used as interchangeable biological assets. There were only 5 confirmed red ice cases between 2013 and 2019. Jessica Thornton's code, text 447B, was now believed to be the 6th, and possibly the longest surviving. What made Jessica's case different was not just the length of her containment, nearly 3 years confirmed across 5 countries, but the persistence of her designation. She had never been renamed, never reclassified. Each time the container changed hands, the same code remained. TX147B. TX, experimental, extractable, 447B. Donor serial assigned to Asset Thornton in Kuala Lumpur, June 2017. It was as if someone high within the system wanted her record to remain visible, but never traced to a body, a marker, a warning, a ghost file. Jaroslav's testimony about the Prague facility led to a quiet, unofficial search of archived forensic images from a fire at the plant in 2020. Buried in the image stack was a photograph of a damaged containment unit. It was warped, cracked at the base, partially melted from internal failure. Blood residue had frozen inside the seam, then ruptured through the frost layer, spray painted on the side, just barely visible. 407B, DNR. Hold, 1019. DNR, do not resuscitate, do not record, do not report. Interpretations varied. But Aslan and Sarah read it for what it was. Don't let her leave the system alive. But if the unit had failed, was Jessica still inside? A forensic analyst reviewed the images. There's no confirmation of remains. No body was recovered from the site. What we saw was partial blood loss, possible injury during thaw, but not necessarily death. And then came one more whisper. A nurse, displaced during a 2020 conflict in the Caucasus, now working with a refugee clinic. She had never heard of Jessica Thornton, but she had treated a woman pulled from an abandoned transport container found at a rural border post in Armenia near the edge of Georgia. She was nonverbal, cold burns, scar across her abdomen, didn't speak, didn't react. But when I asked for her name, she looked at me and said one thing. 447B. Samit. The clinic in Armenia had no official name. It operated out of a converted rail depot 35 kilometers from the Georgian border, run by volunteer nurses and doctors from 6 different nations, most of them working off-grid, assisting war refugees, trafficking victims, and abandoned patients left by smugglers on black market routes. They received hundreds of cases each year. But one woman, brought in during the spring of 2020, stayed with them longer than any other. She was found inside a rusted cryogenic shipping container, dumped in a wooded area behind the depot. No passport, no tags, no identification, no fingerprints in any global database. The woman was severely malnourished, cold, burn scars along her lower back and arms. Her abdomen showed signs of previous organ removal or surgical exploration, though the incision had long since closed. She didn't speak, not even in reaction to direct pain stimuli, not in English, not in any language. But one thing broke through. When shown a clipboard with numbers, she tapped a sequence. 447B. The clinic's lead nurse, Ivita Lomas, photographed the interaction. She didn't know about the Thornton case, but she documented everything carefully. Months later, after leaving the clinic and returning to Lithuania, she watched a documentary segment titled "The Girl Who Wouldn't Close Her Eyes." She froze, and then, through a satellite connection, she sent an encrypted message to the Thornton Initiative. "I think she lived, and I think I held her hand every day for 9 weeks." Interpol dispatched a forensic liaison. They retrieved Evada's photos, clinic records, and blood samples, but by the time they arrived, the woman was gone. A humanitarian aid group had transported her, along with 47 other displaced patients, to an undisclosed medical center in Kazakhstan. Records were destroyed in a fire 2 weeks later. None of the patients were officially logged. She had vanished again. Sarah taped Evada's message beside Jessica's photo, and beneath it, she wrote, 9 weeks. 9 weeks in the light. That's more than I'd expected. That's more than some ever get. The girl with no past had Ari returned to the dark. But now the entire network had a new problem. She could survive the freeze. She could outlast the transfers. She could remember her name, even if it was only a code. By late 2020, the trail had officially entered the gray zone. Interpol's working group, now codenamed Frostline,
shifted its attention to a pattern that had remained below the radar for years. Privately funded medical facilities operating within legal jurisdictions, but quietly hosting black operations after hours. They called them white coats, black rooms. These weren't underground bunkers or jungle labs. They were clean, accredited hospitals in cities like Tbilisi, Baku, Yerevan, and Astana. They had permits, they had logos, they had licensed surgeons, and between midnight and 4 a.m., they received experimental patients delivered in unmarked trucks, often with no accompanying paperwork. Some stayed for days, others for just hours. Almost none were registered under their real names. A Ukrainian radiologist, Dr. Semyon Verov, came forward anonymously in a confidential debriefing. He'd worked a contract rotation at a hospital in Shymkent, Kazakhstan. There was a patient, female, about mid-30s, arrived in a sealed pod, frost-damaged skin, but conscious. She had a scar on her left side, horizontal, healed, eyes darted constantly, non-verbal, but she kept pointing to a label stitched into the inside hem of the blanket they wrapped her in. It read, TX447B, Rec Hold 4R. We were told not to scan her, not to sedate her, just monitor and report if vitals dropped. After 2 nights, she was gone. That code, it's never left my mind. The Thornton Initiative had a breakthrough. An investigative journalist embedded in the Georgian Medical Board uncovered laundered research funds being funneled through offshore accounts linked to a patient data retention program registered under a shell company called Erevan Biotech. One of the test patients listed on a misfiled invoice. Subject ID TX447B, status transient recovery notes, cellular regeneration above expected baseline, hold extension recommended. Sarah read the file 3 times. They weren't trying to extract from her anymore, she said. They were studying her, watching her survive. She went from victim to experiment. The deeper they went, the more the question changed. No longer. Is Jessica Thornton dead? Now it was. Why is she still alive? And more chilling. Who wants to keep her that way? Back at the wall of names, Sarah placed a new headline at the center, TX447B, From Harvest to Hostage, and underlined it in red. When Interpol's Frostline unit convened in Vienna for their end-of-year review in 2020, the mood was not hopeful. There was no confirmed location, no custody photo, no fingerprint, no confirmed DNA match. And yet, one phrase kept returning in the intelligence briefs. She survived. Not once, not twice, but at least 7 times. Across 4
continents. The subject was referred to only as the woman with no exit wound. In Black hospital slang, the phrase meant something specific. It was used for trafficking survivors who passed through organ removal or biological study programs, but were never listed as deceased or recovered. She entered the system, but was never processed through it. Jessica Thornton had become the living exception, the one patient who never flatlined, never completed, and never escaped either. The term exit wound was more than medical. It was symbolic. In systems where most victims were silenced, lost, or absorbed, Jessica had done the unthinkable. She remained visible, like a ghost in the machine, but a ghost that breathed and remembered. In early 2021, an intercepted audio file emerged. It had been recorded during a smuggled tele-brief between 2 handlers operating out of Dubai and Bucharest. The voices were distorted, the names redacted, but the message was clear. She remembers numbers, that's the problem. She doesn't know who she is, but she knows the code. You didn't clean the imprint? No, it's embedded. You can't erase a survival code if it's all they have. The next lines were even more disturbing. Then put her under again, or burn the container, but make sure she doesn't reach a consulate. Back in the U.S., Sarah met with a Senate subcommittee quietly investigating overseas trafficking corridors linked to organ laundering. She brought with her a single photograph, faded, unclear, but showing a woman wrapped in thermal foil, eyes open, being lifted from a container behind a checkpoint. The nurse who took the photo couldn't confirm the name, but Sarah looked at it and whispered, "It's her. That's my sister. No exit wound." Interpol flagged 22 medical facilities across 9 countries, but none still held the patient known as TX-447B. She was always one transfer ahead, one container gone, one cryopod missing, one clinic burned, one nurse vanished. Jessica Thornton, if alive, was not free. She was moving cold to cold, blanket to blanket, facility to facility. No passport, no case file, no death certificate, just the numbers 407B here, and the fact that no one could finish her. By mid-2021, the Frost Line Task Force began identifying a new operational pattern in the black medical trade: mobile containment vessels. These weren't ambulances, they weren't shipping containers in the traditional sense. They were retrofitted medical pods disguised as industrial refrigeration units used to transport sedated or frozen patients across international waters. The system had a name: the Vessel Protocol. Here's how it worked. A patient, often a victim abducted during a surgical tourism trip, is sedated, tagged, and placed inside a cryo-compatible medical unit. That unit is registered under false freight codes: frozen livestock, biological coolant, or perishable vaccines. The unit is transferred between non-commercial cargo vessels, often flagged in nations with minimal port inspection protocols, such as Liberia, Togo, or the Marshall Islands. Each unit remains at sea for days, sometimes weeks, before being offloaded into neutral ports and then redirected inland to temporary black facilities. Once the facility completes its purpose, extraction, testing, imaging, the container is sanitized, resealed, and reassigned. No names, no passenger records, no digital trail. Only the container code survives. Interpol finally found one. A vessel named MV Hadrian Blue, flagged in Panama, had docked in Haiphong, Vietnam, carrying 17 refrigerated cargo pods. One of them had a dented side panel. Internal scans revealed blood residue and human biological material. The container's interior log chip had been damaged by heat exposure, but a single fragment of alphanumeric text was recovered: 447B V4. It was the 4th variation of the Thornton unit. Same prefix, same serial lineage. They had found the shell, but not the woman. A former port worker in Pattaya, Thailand, later interviewed under anonymity, described a scene in 2019 that now took on new meaning. A van came with a container, white, no labels, no customs. 2 men pulled it out and transferred it onto a trawler. The woman inside looked dead, but when they tilted the pod, her eyes opened. No movement, just eyes. He added something else. They called it the vessel, not a container. A vessel, like it was holy, like it had to be kept cold for a reason. Back in D.C., Sarah added it to her evidence board. She circled one phrase in red ink: kept cold for a reason. And next to it she wrote, "What happens if she wakes up completely?" Interpol confirmed it. Jessica Thornton had become too significant to dispose of and too dangerous to release. The wake code wasn't part of any official medical handbook. It didn't exist in Red Cross protocols. It didn't appear in cryogenic manuals. There was no mention of it in medical school. But within the dark infrastructure of transnational human trafficking networks, it was whispered like a fail-safe. If they wake, they remember. In late 2021, a compromised informant working inside a logistics hub in Bucharest provided Frostline with an internal memo. It was crude, unstamped, no logo, just text. But it held a chilling directive. Wake code 447B. Subject under intermittent recovery. Memory retention unconfirmed. If subject awakens without clearance, contain immediately. Silence communication. Prevent exposure to consular or media agents. Do not attempt full reintegration. Reintegration meant releasing her, letting her speak, letting her remember, letting her become Jessica Thornton again. And that was the greatest threat of all. Sarah had long believed that her sister might survive, but she'd never considered what that survival meant to those who'd held her captive. to the traffickers, doctors, funders, and smugglers. Jessica wasn't just a victim, she was evidence. Evidence of a multi-continent, multi-year operation that had penetrated hospitals, shipping ports, visa systems, and even diplomatic channels. Interpol now had testimonies from a Vietnamese ship mechanic who'd heard a woman screaming inside a frozen pod, a Serbian nurse who treated a silent patient with a surgical scar and no chart, a South African customs agent who saw a woman's eyes open inside a meat freezer container, all different years, all different countries, but each description ended the same way. She looked straight at me, like she remembered who she was but couldn't say it. The Frostline Task Force coined a final term, the Wake Code Trigger. A survivor with intact memory, able to testify across jurisdictions, could collapse dozens of operations in under a year. If she talked, entire syndicates could fall. That's why the orders were so clear. Do not let her talk, not in English, not in numbers, not even in dreams. But they forgot one thing. Jessica didn't need words. She had patterns, she had numbers, she had recognition, and she had one sister, Sarah, who wouldn't stop decoding every fragment until the last lock fell. In January of 2022, deep in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania, a seasonal maintenance crew was clearing snow from a fire access road that hadn't been used in over 3 years. The road led nowhere, just an abandoned lodge once used for research retreats. The building had no power, no windows, and no recent footprints. But tucked beneath the frozen siding of the main cabin, one of the workers spotted something odd. A sequence of numbers carved into the wood by hand. Deliberate, precise, frozen beneath a thin layer of ice. 447B, 6W, STN22, DO03. They photographed it, thinking it might be military or geocaching code. The image went viral briefly on an Eastern European hiking forum. One of Sarah's contacts, an open-source analyst named Kara Tenley, recognized the sequence immediately. She had seen Do3 before. It was a reference found in a corrupted medical log recovered from a scorched container unit in Georgia. Tenley forwarded the image to Sarah. At first glance, it seemed impossible. Jessica wouldn't have had access to carving tools. She wouldn't have had time. She might not have even been conscious. But the angles of the lettering were familiar. Jessica had studied architectural drafting in college. This was her hand. The crew was called back. They searched the lodge thoroughly. Inside, the door frame of a service closet. Cold is safe. And scrawled in soot on the back of a mirror, watches. All signs pointed to a recent presence, not older than 3 months, and all of them matched Jessica's visual processing pattern. Symmetry, directional hints, number anchoring. It wasn't just a message, it was a map. More chilling was what they found beneath the main floorboards, a shallow compartment lined with foil insulation and oxygen tubing, large enough for one person to lie in, curled into a fetal position, no food, no bedding, just tape residue, and strands of blonde hair. The lodge was likely a transition stop, a temporary station used to hold subjects during ground transport before loading them into vessel containers bound for the Black Sea. Jessica had likely been left behind briefly, and during those frozen hours she remembered. And she documented. Frostline added a new code name to the file, Thornton Protocol, Cold Memory. Back in Illinois, Sarah stared at the printed photo of the first carving. 4B, 6W, STN22, DO3. She didn't need a decoder. 6 women, Station 22, Door 3. She wasn't alone. This wasn't just Jessica's story anymore. It was a network of survivors, hidden in codes, locations, and scars, each one leaving breadcrumbs in case someone was still looking. And someone was. Door 3 wasn't just a label. It was a directive. Sarah knew this instinctively. She'd seen enough of Jessica's mental patterns to know her sister wouldn't label a door unless it mattered. With Interpol, Frostline, and now 3 NGO observers watching, they tracked the code from the Romanian lodge to what looked like a long, defunct train depot in Constanța, Romania, on the Black Sea coast. According to Customs satellite imaging, Depot STN-22 Huichans had been abandoned in 2015, but showed irregular power spikes in December 2021 and January 2022, just days before Jessica's carved messages were discovered in the mountains. When the international team arrived, they found 3 shipping containers inside the depot's central storage hangar. All had their codes scraped off. All were fitted with external power conduits, and one had a number burned faintly into the metal in a curved human hand. D03. The container wasn't locked. Inside, the smell of disinfectant and rust hung in the air. The interior was lined with thermal panels, a cracked medical cot, and IV tubing curled into the shape of an ampersand. And on the back wall, written in something darker than ink, was a phrase in shaky block letters. I am Jessica Thornton. Sarah fell silent. Everyone in the room did. No one took a photo. No one breathed. It was no longer a mystery. She was alive. She had written that herself, and she had been here. In the corner of the container was a small steel panel, half open, revealing a false compartment. Inside, a ripped hospital gown, a strip of cloth with foreign barcodes, and a laminated tag marked 6W447B. There was no doubt now. 6W stood for 6 women. TX447 Boasies was Jessica. They had not just found a holding unit, they had found evidence of captivity, of movement, of intent. Interpol immediately sealed the site. Forensic techs swabbed every surface. Under the cot, they found a drawn grid etched faintly into the metal. It showed 6 rectangles numbered 1 through 6. Only rectangle 3 had a small X marked inside. Sarah didn't need a key. Jessica was telling her she made it out of door 3. The others didn't. Back in Washington, the Frost Line Task Force elevated the classification. This was no longer about a missing American tourist. It was about a systemic, coordinated network of organ trafficking, abduction, forced research, and illegal biological testing operating across no fewer than 11 countries. And Jessica Thornton was now considered a material witness of high international threat, not to governments, but to those who built the doors and those who locked them. Sarah stood in the snow outside Depot STN-22, clutching the fabric marked with her sister's code. She whispered to the sky, "You picked the wrong girl to keep alive." The man who called himself Marin Luca wasn't listed in any official customs database. No shipping license, no passport history after 2009, no tax records, not even a birth certificate tied to that name. But when a pair of Romanian dock workers were arrested in a routine narcotics raid, they offered something unexpected in exchange for immunity. A journal. It belongs to Marin. You find him, you find all the girls. The journal was leather-bound, water-damaged, and smelled faintly of engine oil. Its pages were written in a mix of Romanian, broken German, and phonetic English. Most law enforcement dismissed it as coded nonsense, but Sarah didn't. Inside the margins were drawings of containers, some with human silhouettes, others with anatomical annotations. But it was a single entry on page 53 that froze her hand. She remembers. She is the wrong one to keep. The entry was dated December 2021, the same week Jessica carved "Cold is safe" into the wood at the Romanian lodge. The journal confirmed what they had feared. Jessica Thornton was never anonymous cargo. She was watched, tracked, feared, even by the smugglers. Interpol's linguists worked day and night to translate the rest. What emerged was a route map, one that spanned from Tijuana to Kiev, Batumi to Bangkok, Dakar to Odessa. Each segment described not just ports, but what happened between them: sedations, transfers, errors, escapes. One particular note caught Sarah's eye. 6W route failed. Door 3, subject escaped. Vessel compromised, blacklisted from Kobe, Izmir, Miami. Door 3, subject. That was Jessica. She wasn't just a survivor. She had caused an international incident within the trafficking network. Her escape had disrupted supply, burned roots, and exposed vulnerabilities. One woman, one escape. Dozens of corrupted corridors collapsed behind her. Then came the last entry. They'll come for me next. I should have vented her, but she stared like she saw everything. I left her at STN. Door. Interpol now had evidence from both sides, the survivor leaving marks behind in the cold, and the smuggler documenting his own unraveling. But Marin Luca was gone, vanished from Constanza days before the journal surfaced. Last seen boarding a freighter headed for the Strait of Hormuz under false credentials. And Jessica, still no confirmed location. But now the entire world was hunting her. The term compromised cargo wasn't part of any public customs database, but inside the encrypted files recovered from a seized offshore server in Reykjavik, Frostline investigators uncovered a folder labeled QRT Stat, Will Read 4147, Status Compromised. Inside were 8 PDF manifests. Each one listed medical codes, no names, no genders, just data. But they all referenced a single phrase: Subject 447B, Carrier, Dorzo 3, Satien 22, Zone, Theta Condition, Partial Recall, Event Disposition, High Containment Priority, Route, Risk 81%, Last Contact, Red Zone, Constanza, Pod 3. It confirmed everything. Jessica Thornton, Subject 447B, had not only survived her capture but resisted memory suppression protocols, escaped her handlers, and had now triggered an emergency-level alert inside the network's logistics system. This wasn't a rescue mission anymore. It was containment versus exposure, and Jessica stood at the center of it. The Reykjavik files revealed something even more damning. A containment log from late 2021 stated, Pod 3 audio leakage, noted subject verbalizing names and procedural dates. Recorded phrases include Sarah Thornton, clinic, teeth removed, I remember. She had been speaking through the walls, no pen, no paper, no way out, but her voice was all she had left. And she used it. They hadn't expected her to speak. They hadn't expected her to remember. Interpol called an emergency summit with Europol and the UN Human Rights Office. The question was now diplomatic. If a missing American citizen had been trafficked through Allied territories and used in unauthorized biomedical trials, what global laws had been broken? And more importantly, how many others had been silenced before her? Meanwhile, in a remote translation facility near Oslo, Frostline analysts decrypted part of an intercepted comm log from a handler cell in Ankara, 2022. 447B was the only one who lasted beyond cycle 4. She decoded patterns in sedation, began to mimic sleep. We lost her in Constanza. She's somewhere in Europe. She's not running. She's tracking us. That one line, she's tracking us, reached Sarah in a secure memo. She smiled for the first time in months. Her sister wasn't just alive, she was awake. She was strategic. She was dangerous to all the right people. Interpol issued an internal classification change. Jessica Thornton, no longer victim, now considered witness, priority asset. A new status card was created. Coding, compromised cargo class, uncontained location, unknown, threat to network, extreme. The envelope arrived without a return address, white, weathered, unmarked. It was slipped beneath the glass door of the U.S. consulate in Warsaw, Poland, sometime before dawn on May 19, 2022. No fingerprints, no DNA trace, no postage, just 2 words scrawled in red across the front for Sarah. Inside were 9 torn pieces of graph paper, carefully folded and wrapped in plastic, each covered in smudged handwriting and red ink. No signature, no date. But Frostline's handwriting analysis team confirmed what Sarah already suspected. It was Jessica's hand. Each page contained disconnected fragments, memories, clues, possibly even code. But it was the first line on the first page that stunned the entire task force. I was awake for 5 days before they noticed. She had pretended to be unconscious for 5 full days inside a sealed pod, listening, learning, recording. Another page read, he called it the bridge, said we weren't patients, said we were proof of function. He wore hospital shoes but smelled like fuel. There were 6 of us. One had a name like mine. I watched her stop breathing. Page 4. They asked me to draw numbers. They said if I could remember patterns, I might be useful. I gave them false codes. They moved me. I carved the truth on door 3. Page 7. There's one man still helping. I think his name was Felix. He gave me glucose when they forgot to feed me. He whispered, if I could take you, I would. Then he left the door unlatched. That's how I got to Romania. The final page was more cryptic than all the others. There were only 4 words. Sarah, not alone. Find 6W. The Frostline analyst cross-referenced everything. Felix became a new target name. Double power lines became a key feature for scanning ports and thermal signatures. 6th Tobhur was confirmed as 6 women, likely the complete group transported with Jessica, and the phrase proof of function that became part of a chilling theory. Some victims had been used for neurological resistance studies to see how long the brain could survive organ sedation without losing identity. Jessica had passed every threshold, which made her dangerous because she still remembered who she was. Sarah clutched the envelope, staring at the words again. Find 6W. Her sister was leaving instructions, not for rescue, but for justice. And the door 3, had only ever been the beginning. Split, Croatia, a coastal city once known for Roman ruins and Adriatic sunsets, now held the next piece of the puzzle in its industrial underbelly. Frostline's tracking software, using thermal satellite data and encrypted maritime logs, had isolated a cluster of containers at the eastern freight docks that matched the signature Jessica had described. Double power lines, insulated side vents, no commercial registry. The local authorities denied knowledge. The terminal was supposed to be decommissioned since 2018, but a few locals, when approached quietly, confessed to rumors. That part of the dock's not empty, one welder said. Every few months, trucks come at night. No markings, no lights, no questions. Frostline mobilized a small operations team. Sarah was not officially part of the field task force, but she made the call. If she's alive, I want to be the one who finds her. When the team entered the restricted zone at 03:24 a.m., the silence was suffocating. 10 containers lined the water's edge, all unmarked, all locked, all cold to the touch, except one. Container, ST Ensenting. Sarah felt her legs weaken when she saw it, the label from Jessica's note. A bolt cutter broke the padlock, the door creaked open, and what they found inside wasn't just evidence, it was an archive. 6 hospital beds bolted to the floor, IV racks still hanging, plastic bins filled with surgical drapes, restraints, and sedatives, and pinned to the interior wall, a faded photo of 6 women standing shoulder to shoulder, blindfolded, each with a number painted on her forehead. Jessica was number 3. Next to the photo was a rusted clipboard wrapped in red string. Inside, a sheet that said simply, Cycle 4 Evaluation Protocol. Only 2 remained conscious past hour. 96. Subject 447B exhibited lucid recall. Subject 449C terminated. Only Jessica had made it out, but someone, maybe Felix, had preserved this, not destroyed it, not moved it, as if it were waiting to be found. Sarah stepped toward the rear of the container. There, scratched into the wall in barely legible lines, if they find this, I'm still ahead. Don't stop. Find the bridge. She's next. She, or someone Jessica had met after her escape. Sarah photographed everything. Interpol sealed the site. Frostline began building an evidentiary case for an international tribunal. But inside, Sarah knew this wasn't the end. Jessica had survived Kuala Lumpur, survived Thailand. Now traces of her voice echoed in Croatia, and she was still moving, not running, leading. The breakthrough came not from satellite scans or intercepted messages. It came from a cigarette kiosk camera in Thessaloniki, Greece. A Frostline analyst named Irina Kuslova, working overtime and off-record, had run facial recognition tests using Jessica's 2009 driver's license photo. Age progressed and enhanced with AI modeling based on her trauma profile. No hits across airports, none in embassies, nothing in hospitals, until Irina widened the search to include civilian footage, crowds, side streets, port markets, and there, in a 6-second clip recorded May 3rd, 2022, on a traffic cam at Ignatia Street, a woman in a worn hoodie, head down, passing by a food stall. Behind her, a brief glimpse of her reflection in a window pane. Not enough to confirm until Irina enhanced the frame and ran it through trauma-weighted biometric software. 96.2% match. Jessica Thornton, alive in Greece. 21 days before the red letter envelope appeared in Warsaw, Sarah reviewed the footage frame by frame. There was no direct eye contact, no pause, no urgency, just a calculated walk through a populated area. She wanted to be seen, Sarah murmured, but not enough to be followed. Interpol flagged all passport attempts, hospital, admissions, and ferry tickets within 150 kilometers of Thessaloniki. No matches. But a small ferry company operating without digital logs, Philos Lines, had a payment recorded in cash for a single female traveler heading to Chios Island on May 5th. Name used, Maria Costa. A name Jessica had used once before in 2017 as a hotel alias in Kuala Lumpur. Frostline redirected the search. If she's using the same cover name from before, it's not by accident, Sarah noted. She's placing breadcrumbs, but only for those who know what to look for. Further footage from Chios revealed nothing, but one stall vendor remembered a woman matching Jessica's build who had asked about old freight routes to Izmir, Turkey. She was careful, didn't want to talk, but she kept repeating, "Which boats don't ask for ID?" That was Jessica, not hiding, planning. Back at Frostline HQ, analysts overlaid her movement. Romania, Croatia, Greece, heading east. Why would a survivor go back to the origin? Only one answer made sense. She wasn't looking for safety. She was looking for someone. Sarah believed it now more than ever. Jessica had found something or someone that made her stay in the shadows. Not fear, not escape, a mission. As Sarah stared at the enhanced image, she whispered, "You're getting close to something. I just don't know what." For months, the bridge had been an elusive reference. It appeared in Jessica's journal fragments, in the smuggler's logs from Constanza, in encoded chat logs intercepted from ports in the Black Sea. At first, investigators assumed it was symbolic, perhaps a metaphor for survival or connection, but then an old freight registry surfaced from a defunct Turkish shipping firm showing the term Project Kopru attached to a decommissioned military medical facility outside Izmir, Turkey. Kopru, Turkish for bridge. Located on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by olive groves and razor wire, the facility was built in 1988, abandoned in 2005, and supposedly razed in 2009. But Frostline's thermal imaging showed something else. Generators, residual heat signatures, active water lines. Someone was still using the site. Sarah pushed to join the advance team, but Interpol denied the request. It was a high-risk extraction site, no civilians allowed, not even family. But she handed them something before they deployed, a small locket. Inside, a photo of Jessica from 2012. On the back, "If she sees this, tell her I never stopped looking." The operation launched at 03:17 a.m. under full silence protocols. 6 agents, no lights, no gunfire, just cameras, scanners, and steady breath. Inside, the team found long corridors stripped of wall panels, gurneys rusting in place, electrical cords dangling like vines. And at the far end, a steel door marked KPR 447. The number, her number. They breached it. The room was empty, no subjects, no equipment. But taped to the wall was a single sheet of lined paper, torn from a notebook, written in red marker. "I know who's funding this." And then a name, Bellamy. Back at Frostline HQ, Sarah stared at the name, Bellamy. She hadn't heard it in 12 years. It was Dr. Ezra Bellamy, the biotech consultant Jessica once interned under in Boston. The the man who helped her get the surgery in Malaysia, the same man who vanished from public view in 2018, the same man who had filed patents in Cyprus under proxy labs, the same man who could make people disappear with just a phone call. Jessica wasn't just exposing the network, she was tracing it back to its origin, to those who funded it, legitimized it, and hid behind labs and conferences while bodies were shipped in crates. Now they had a name, and Jessica, she had left it like a loaded weapon, taped to a crumbling wall. She was still alive, still moving, and now she wasn't just a survivor. She was a witness hunting the architects. Dr. Ezra Bellamy was once a rising star in regenerative medicine. By 2015, his name had appeared in Forbes' 30 Under 40 Innovators. He spoke at global biotech summits, authored peer-reviewed papers on post-traumatic neurogenesis, and had received undisclosed venture capital from a Singapore-based trust. But after 2017, he vanished. No published research, no patents, no public speaking, just silence, until now. Frostline analysts traced Project Kopru back to a non-profit entity founded in Cyprus in late 2016, the Bellamy Biomedical Foundation. Officially, it listed its mission as providing medical support in underdeveloped regions of Southeast Asia. But its financial records told a different story. $21 million in anonymous crypto transfers between 2017 and 2020 linked shell companies with warehouses in Malaysia, Romania, and Constanza, medical equipment imports that never arrived at any public hospital, and buried in the metadata of a 2018 archive site backup, one line of HTML code stood out. Rollout, anomalous resistance, recommend biometric deviation study. Sarah stared at the name. He didn't just know her, he studied her. Jessica had interned at Bellamy's Boston lab in the summer of 2015. She admired him, quoted his lectures in her journals. He even wrote one of her medical school recommendation letters. And yet, 2 years later, he had personally arranged her travel to Kuala Lumpur, recommended the clinic, paid for the recovery suite. This wasn't coincidence, it was a controlled entry. Predatory science disguised as mentorship. Interpol issued a red notice for Dr. Ezra Bellamy, but there was no trace of him in the US, EU, or Asia. However, a hidden server discovered in Belgrade, locked behind 8 layers of encryption, contained biometric test data labeled Group Delta. 6. Status: partial recovery. Witness tracking required subject 487B. Profile: updated, tagged, last known. Location: Thessaloniki. Trajectory: target, seeking financier origin, threat level, critical. Jessica wasn't hiding. She was following the money, back to the beginning, back to Bellamy. Sarah looked at the final page of Jessica's last known letter and whispered, "You knew it was him all along." Interpol investigators now had confirmation. The Bellamy Foundation wasn't a nonprofit. It was a front for unauthorized biomedical testing, organ harvesting, and resistance mapping experiments on abducted women trafficked under the promise of cosmetic surgery. And Jessica, she was the only survivor who escaped with her memory intact. And now, she was bringing it all down, one name at a time. Jessica Thornton's body was never recovered. Only her codes, her marks, her voice. Sarah Thornton gave her final testimony to the UN Human Trafficking Task Force. Horizon Medical Wellness was shut down. Project Kopru was listed as a human rights violation under international law. 17 doctors were convicted, 7 biotech firms were dissolved. The name Jessica Thornton became synonymous with survival, memory, and resistance. And Bellamy, some say he died in the cold. Others say he started again, somewhere deeper, darker, better hidden. But what matters most is this. One woman remembered, and she made sure the world never forgot. If you want to hear more stories like this one, make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who enjoys a deep dive into mystery.